Chapter 4. Since most people don't like to get up while it is still dark, the morning line for the water ration was always the shortest of the day. Yet there were still enough people about when Cheryl hurried to get a place in line so that no one ever bothered her. By the time she had her water, the sun would be up, and the streets were a good deal safer. Besides that, she and Mrs. Miles had fallen into the habit of meeting every day. Whoever came first saved a place in line, and walking back together. Mrs. Miles always had the little boy with her, who still seemed to be ill with the quash. Apparently, her husband needed the protein-rich peanut butter more than the child did. The water ration had been increased. This was so welcome that Cheryl tried not to notice how much harder it was to carry, and how her back hurt when she climbed the stairs. There was even enough water now to wash with. The water points were supposed to open again by mid-November at the very latest, and that wasn't too far away. This morning, like most of the other mornings, Cheryl was back before 8, and when she came into the apartment, she saw that Andy was dressed and just ready to leave. "Talk to him, Cheryl," Andy said. "Convince him that he is being a chunkhead. It must be senility." He kissed her goodbye before he went out. It had been 3 weeks since the fight, and on the surface things were the same as before, but underneath something had changed. Some of the feeling of security, or perhaps love, had been eroded away. They did not talk about it. "What's wrong?" she asked, peeling off the outer layers of clothing that swaddled her. Andy stopped in the doorway. "Ask Saul. I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you in great detail. But when he's all through, remember one thing. He's wrong."
"Every man to his own opinion,"
Saul said placidly, rubbing the grease from an ancient can of dubbing onto an even more ancient pair of army boots. "Opinion nothing," Andy said. "You're just asking for trouble. I'll see you tonight, Cheryl. If it's as quiet as yesterday, I shouldn't be too late." He closed the door, and she locked it behind him. "What on earth is he talking about?" Cheryl asked, warming her hands over the brick of sea coal smoldering in the stove. It was raw and cold out, and the wind rattled the window in its frame.
"He's talking about protest,"
Saul said, admiring the buffed, blackened toe of the boot.
"Or maybe better, he's talking against protest. You heard about the emergency bill? It's been smeared all over TV for the last week."
"Is that the one they call the baby killer bill?"
"They?"
Saul shouted, scrubbing angrily at the boot.
"Who are they? A bunch of bums, that's who. People with their minds in the Middle Ages and their feet in a rut. In other words, bums."
"But, Saul, you can't force people to practice something they don't believe in. A lot of them still think that it has something to do with killing babies."
"So they think wrong. Am I to blame because the world is full of fatheads? You know well enough that birth control has nothing to do with killing babies. In fact, it saves them. Which is the bigger crime, letting kids die of disease and starvation, or seeing that the unwanted ones don't get born in the first place?"
"Putting it that way sounds different. But aren't you forgetting about natural law? Isn't birth control a violation of that?"
"Darling, the history of medicine is the history of the violation of natural law. The Church, and that includes the Protestant as well as the Catholic, tried to stop the use of anesthetics because it was natural law for a woman to have pain while giving birth. And it was natural law for people to die of sickness, and natural law that the body not be cut open and repaired. There was even a guy named Bruno that got burned at the stake because he didn't believe in absolute truth and natural laws like these. Everything was against natural law once, and now birth control has got to join the rest. Because all our troubles today come from the fact that there are too many people in the world."
"That's too simple, Saul. Things aren't really that black and white."
"Oh, yes, they are. No one wants to admit it, that's all. Look, we live in a lousy world today, and our troubles come from only one reason. Too goddamn many people. Now, how come that for 99% of the time that people have been on this earth, we never had any overpopulation problems?"
"I don't know. I never thought about it."
you're not the only one. The reason, aside from wars and floods and earthquakes, unimportant things like that, was that everybody was sick like dogs. A lot of babies died, a lot of kids died, and everybody else died young. A coolie in China, living on nothing but polished rice, used to die of old age before he was 30. I heard that on TV last night, and I believe it. And one of the senators read from a horn book, that's a school book they used to have for kids back in colonial America, that said something like, "Be kind to your little sister or brother, he won't be with you very long." They bred like flies and died like flies. Infant mortality. Boy. And not so long ago, I tell you, in 1949, after I got out of the army, I was in Mexico. Babies there die from more diseases than you or I ever heard of. They never baptize the kids until after they're a year old, 'cause most of them are dead by that time, and baptisms cost a lot of money. That's why there never used to be a population problem. The whole world used to be one big Mexico, breeding and dying, and just about staying even.
Then, what changed?
I'll tell you what changed. He shook the boot at her. Modern medicine arrived. Everything had a cure. Malaria was wiped out along with all the other diseases that had been killing people young and keeping the population down. Death control arrived. Old people lived longer. More babies lived who would have died, and now they grow up into old people who live longer still. People are still being fed into the world just as fast. They're just not being taken out of it at the same rate. 3 are born for every 2 that die. So the population doubles and doubles and keeps on doubling at a quicker rate all the time. We got a plague of people, a disease of people infesting the world. We got more people who are living longer. Less people have to be born. That's the answer. We got death control. We gotta match it with birth control.
I still don't see how you can when people still think it has something to do with killing babies.
Stop with the dead babies,
Saul shouted, and heaved the boot the length of the room.
There are no babies involved in this, alive or dead, except in the pointed heads of the idiots who repeat what they have heard without understanding a word of it. Present company excepted.
He added in a not too sincere voice.
How can you kill something that never existed? We're all winners in the ovarian derby, yet I never heard anyone crying about the, if you will excuse the biological term, the sperm who were the losers in the race.
Saul, what on earth are you talking about?
The ovarian derby. Every time an egg is fertilized, there are a couple of million sperm swimming along, racing along, trying to do the job. Only one of them can win the derby, since the very instant fertilization takes place, all the rest of them are out in the cold. Does anyone give a damn about the millions of sperm that don't make it? The answer is no. So what are all the complicated rhythm charts, devices, pills, caps, and drugs that are used for birth control? Nothing but ways of seeing that one other sperm doesn't make it either. So where do the babies come in? I don't see any babies.
When you put it that way, I guess they don't. But if it is that simple, how come nothing was ever done before this? Saul breathed a long and tremulous sigh, and gloomily retrieved the boot and went back to polishing it.
Cheryl, he said, if I could answer that, they would probably make me president tomorrow. Nothing is ever that simple when it comes down to finding an answer. Everyone has got their own ideas, and they push them and say to hell with everyone else. That's the history of the human race. It got us on top, only now it is pushing us off. The thing is that people will put up with any kind of discomfort, and dying babies, and old age at 30 as long as it has always been that way. Try to get them to change and they fight you, even while they're dying, saying it was good enough for Grandpa, so it's good enough for me. Bango. Dead. When the UN sprayed the houses with DDT in Mexico to kill the mosquitoes who carried malaria that killed the people, they had to have soldiers hold the people back so they could spray. The locals didn't like that white stuff on the furniture, didn't look good. I saw it myself. But that was the rarity. Death control slid into the world mostly without people even knowing it. Doctors used better and better drugs. Water supplies improved. Public health people saw to it that diseases didn't spread the way they used to. It came about almost naturally, without hardly being noticed. And now we got too many people in the world. And something has to be done about it. But doing something means that people must change, make an effort, use their minds, which is what most people do not like to do.
Yet, it does seem like an intrusion of privacy, Saul, telling people they can't have any children.
Stop it. We're almost back to the dead babies again. Birth control doesn't mean no children. It just means that people have a choice how they want to live. Like rutting, unthinking, breeding animals, or like reasoning creatures. Will a married couple have 1, 2, or 3 children, whatever number will keep the world population steady and provide a full life of opportunity for everyone? Or will they have 4, 5, or 6, unthinking and uncaring, and raise them in hunger and cold and misery? Like that world out there, he added, pointing out of the window.
If the world is like that, then everyone must be unthinking and selfish, like you say.
No. I think better of the human race. They've just never been told. They've been born animals and died animals. Too many of them. I blame the stinking politicians and so-called public leaders who have avoided the issue and covered it up because it was controversial, and what the hell, it will be years before it matters, and I'm going to get mine now. So mankind gobbled in a century all the world's resources that had taken millions of years to store up. And no one on the top gave a damn or listened to all the voices that were trying to warn them. They just let us overproduce and overconsume until now the oil is gone, the topsoil depleted and washed away, the trees chopped down, the animals extinct, the earth poisoned. And all we have to show for this is 7 billion people fighting over the scraps that are left, living a miserable existence, and still breeding without control. So I say the time has come to stand up and be counted.
Saul pushed his feet into the boots, laced them up, and tied them. He put on a heavy sweater, then took an ancient, moth-eaten battle jacket from the wardrobe. A row of ribbons drew a line of color across the olive drab, and under them were a sharpshooter's medal and a technical school badge.
It must have shrunk,
Saul said, grunting as he struggled to close it over his stomach. Then he wrapped a scarf around his neck and shrugged into his ancient, battered overcoat. "Where are you going?" Cheryl asked, baffled.
To make a statement. To ask for trouble, as our friend Andy told me. I'm 75 years old, and I reached this venerable state by staying out of trouble, keeping my mouth shut, and not volunteering, just like I learned in the army. Maybe there were too many guys in the world like me, I don't know. Maybe I should have made my protest a lot earlier, but I never saw anything I felt like protesting about, which I do now. The forces of darkness and the forces of light, they're meeting today. I'm going to join with the forces of light.
He jammed a woolen watch cap down over his ears and stalked to the door. "Saul, what on earth are you talking about? Tell me, please," Cheryl begged, not knowing whether to laugh or to cry.
There's a rally. The Save Our Babies nuts are marching on City Hall, trying to lick the emergency bill. There's another meeting of people in favor of the bill, and the bigger the turnout there, the better. If enough people stand up and shout, they might be heard. Maybe the bill will get through Congress this time. Maybe.
"Saul," she called out. but the door was closed. Andy brought him home, late that night, helping the 2 ambulance men carry the stretcher up the stairs. Saul was strapped to the stretcher, white-faced and unconscious, breathing heavily. "There was a street fight," Andy said. "Almost a riot when the march started. Saul was in it. He got knocked down. His hip is broken." He looked at her, unsmiling and tired, as the stretcher was carried in. "That can be very serious with old people," he said.